So here's an example just in Excel, for example, and this red bit represents 1 octave of information. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the 12 note collection around C major. So C going up in pitch up to B, and then it starts over at C again and goes up. Now notice that these 3 notes stacked within 1 octave most likely represent a chord, meaning it's a C major chord. But if I was to look at that, particularly if I don't know music theory, I'm not going to be able to visualize that as a C major chord, right? I might have been able to use a tool to say, hey, put in this place a C major chord, and then it stacked it for me. That's cool. But once I've written my entire song, I'm not going to be able to see that if I'm not a music professional, if I don't really understand the chord names, to say, oh, I'm going from C major, and then this is going to a D major, a D minor 7 that we've added here, and now I'm going to an E, minor 9, right? I'm not going to be able to see that normally, and a lot of people that use the software are not adept enough to understand the naming convention of the chords. So it would be nice if you can scrunch this down to one horizontal row, which we'll talk about. Octaves are vertical, not modular. So 1 octave should be 1 row. So what I could do is take that information and put it on 1 row, kind of like if you had tablature, or say you're writing a song and you just want to know the chords, and you just write the chords above the note, the song, the words in the song. That's kind of like having the chords, which are 3 notes each at least, that are right above the song, meaning they're represented on 1 row. You should be able to do that whether you're writing chords or singular notes. Scrunch down everything into 1 row of information if you want to view it that way. So DAWs display pitch vertically over many rows, meaning the pitch is on the y-axis or the vertical axis, time on the x-axis. So an octave spans multiple rows. So when we go octaves up, it's going to be very long. No single place to see C through B as 1 visual unit. So it makes pattern recognition harder. So in other words, this whole thing is representing 1 octave, this red bit right here. It would be nice if I can scrunch it down to something like this. Now this orange bit in the middle is the same data as this bit whole here, this whole thing. Just this middle row, not this one or this one, just the orange row represents that. Now I've written the chords in an unconventional way because I'm writing the chords without referencing the note names, which makes it transferable. You could write the chords any way you want. A DAW should be able to say, hey look, this is a 3-note Ionian chord, or a 3-note Nashville number 1 chord, or a C major chord if I'm in the collection of notes of the C major. But if I was in the collection of notes of D major, then this would be a D major. It would still be an Ionian 3-note chord, but a D major chord. And if I write it this way, notice how much nicer it would be able to visualize the information. Now, if I write a chord, I can write the normal chords. And if I write 1 note, I could write it by the notes from C up to B in pitch in 1 octave. But I can also write it with relative Nashville numbers, which makes more sense for people that don't play the piano, right? Because you could just say, hey, look, choose the collection of notes that you're going to be playing in. It's going to be a 7-note collection, and you can choose 1 through 12 collections based on the major key. You could also say those collections of notes from the perspective of the modes, but as a rule, choose the collection of notes based on the major key, and then tell us what your tonic is, like the Ionian. If you do that, then you can just play your song on a 10 key, like a calculator, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are your notes, and then you have 5 notes, which could be a 0.5 or representing some other key on the keyboard to represent the 5 notes that are outside the collection. So all 12 collections of notes can be represented with these same numbers, which are 12 numbers, but 7 numbers that are inside the 7-note collection. And that would be the idea. And then, of course, you could also change the modal perspective, saying, I want to play the 2 as the tonic. That's fine. If the 2 is the tonic and you're still looking at the collection of notes around C major, meaning you're playing in a Dorian mode, then the bass line of this octave that you're playing in will not be at C, but start at D. So and you should be able to go back and forth between this and this layout and this layout. And you should be able to see this layout in terms of notes if you want to, or in terms of numbers, and be able to view the chords from the perspective of relative chord position or traditional chord names. A modern DAW should be able to do all of those options. So input still limits the piano. So piano uses a UI, so the MIDI keyboard is dominant. So meaning if you want to do a faster data input into a DAW or a MIDI system, it's still going to default to a keyboard. Look at the keyboard. It's uneven. It doesn't represent the actual distance of notes. It's a beautiful instrument, but it shouldn't be the default for people that don't play the piano, right? We can assign the keys on a normal typewriter that would be better. It would be easier. I could just assign the keys. Look, this is 1 through 7, and over here are the 5 notes that are not in the collection, or use the 10 key that would be up top in the numbers, and that would be pretty clear. So you could use the letters if you want to, or you can use the numbers. Again, you should have options to toggle between those different options within a modern MIDI system. So even computer keyboard defaults to the piano-shaped mapping, so reinforces shapes sharp and flat. Now remember, this sharps and flats only kind of make any kind of sense on a piano, because it tells you the difference if you're playing each of the 12 collections of notes, because it's different on the piano because of the shapes of the key. But it's not different in a DAW system. There's no reason to have sharps and flats in a DAW system, because we don't have any differences in actual distance between pitches. So the piano is going to just confuse people from a pure, just what do you need to know from a music theory system, so that you can play the instrument of the DAW, and so that's the problem. So why teach people an outdated instrument layout when they're using a DAW? So again, I'm not putting down the piano. People should learn the piano. It's an efficient musical instrument, still allows you to play in 2 hands better than any other instrument, but it's not symmetrical, so it leads to a lot of problems. So if someone's not using the piano, more and more people aren't using the piano, don't know the piano, didn't learn traditional piano understanding. You don't need it to do the DAW. It's gonna cause you more problems than it's gonna help. So we need 10 key typing interface, meaning you could just use a calculator type, or the 10 key on the typewriter. So forget the keyboard, use the keys. So you could use something like let users input 1, 3, 5 for a major triad. Or we should be able to just map in the major triad as saying it's a 3-note Ionian chord, or give me an Ionian or Nashville number 1 3-note chord that should be able to represent it as a chord, so that you can see it not as stacked notes once you're looking at your song. When you're reviewing your song, it would be nice to be able to recognize that as a chord. That's the C major chord. So, or an Ionian chord, or however you want to see it. The 1-4-7 suspended chord. So Nashville numbers are easier to learn, transpose, and visualize. So again, if you learned on a piano, people are going to resist this. You're going to know you have to learn the natural notes and all the sharps and flats and which keys have how many sharps and flats, but you don't in just plain theory on a DAW system, that's not the way, right? The simplest way to do it is to say, choose your 7-note collection out of the 12 7-note collections that we have. Doesn't mean that you can't play all 12 notes, but the perspective will be from 7 notes in the collection, 5 notes outside of the collection. We'll base it on the major scale, and then of those 7-note collections, which one is the tonic? That's going to tell you what mode you're in, and then from that point, you could just enter the data using 1 through 7, right, which are represent relative position, Ionian through Locrian, and that would be the simplest way, the most efficient way to enter on a computer, which is what more people are doing these days. So type music like math, not a piano.